Dear colleagues, good afternoon in this webinar for teachers training entitled How to Teach Grammar. This is Abdelmajid Ogherli from the National Center for Curricular Development. I'm the coordinator of the English language. At the beginning, I'm going to thank and introduce my colleagues in the studio, Ms. Ula Al-Mouai, English Language Supervisor, Tartus Directorate, Ms. Hanadi Haddad, English Language Supervisor, Tartus Directorate, and Ms. Sana Ismail, English Language Teacher. This webinar is addressed to teachers, actually, to help how to teach grammar to students. So we're going to clarify this as much as we can. At the beginning, I want to start with a question. In what grade do you think we need to start teaching simple grammar? We start with Ms. Saula, please.
Well, we shouldn't start teaching grammar before the 4th grade. The first 3 grades should be communicating and using grammar, but without learning about the rules.
Exactly. So the teacher needs to practice grammar in front of the students so that these students receive correct English,
The same way we learn
without talking about
the same way we learn about our native language, the same way we learn how to speak, and then we know the rules.
So it is acquiring the language, not teaching the language. We make the students, the pupils, acquire the language. Mr. Manhal, before I go to you, I want to thank Mr. Manhal Nassour, director of the session, and Mr. Mahmoud Hamid, the manager of the platform, and our boss, Dr. Darim Tabba, who was behind this institution.
Thank you.
The first slide, please, Mr. Manhal. Can we go to it as a start? Ms. Sana, tell us about the first slide.
Okay.
Preparing to teach.
Here we have an introduction to teaching grammar. Preparing to teach. First of all, we should know who your students are. Next, understand different learning styles. After that, refresh your understanding of grammar rules. Finally, pick out a textbook.
Yes, so we're going to explain them in the following slides. We move to know who your students are. Ms. Hanadi, please.
First, know who your students are. In order to teach effectively, you need to know who your students are. You should also know what they want to learn from you. This will affect your teaching approach as well as what you actually teach. For example, if you are teaching elementary school kids, you might focus on basic grammar rules that are easy to grasp. If you are teaching adults who are learning English as a second language, you might find these students to be older and highly motivated. They also may need immediate language skills.
Yeah, so
you should know your audience.
Yes, before we start, we need to know the level of our students.
There are many types of students.
Yes, the types of students we have, we're going to talk about it also. Young learners need simple grammar. Adults, of course, will feel bored if you go simple. They need to be motivated. We move now to understanding the styles of the students. Ms. Ula?
After we know the audience or the learners, the way what they need, what their desires are, we now should move to their styles, learning styles. We have different learning styles. Some students can learn by watching something.
Can we go next, Mr. Manhal?
Other people can learn by using the things, and we have people who should use all their senses to learn something. So we should know our learners first so that we can decide on the right learning styles.
Here we see a picture prepared by Ms. Ula Al-Mouai about the types of learning.
Yes.
So you can
different types of learning, actually.
We have the visual, we have the auditory, we have the verbal, we have the physical kinesthetic, we have logical, mathematical, social, solitary, and I myself hope that we avoid solitary teaching, because we are working in the action-oriented approach, which focuses
It
on...
can be used at home.
Yeah, at home it's
Student can
okay.
study on its own.
But we're working on having social actors to make our students
Action.
social actors. Move next, Mr. Manhal, please.
The point is that we should know that there are different learning styles, and if we understand that, we can see that some students, if they don't understand something, it doesn't mean that they are below level or something like that. They may need to have it in a different style.
Yes.
You can use a different style.
Maybe they want to learn grammar in any way.
In a visual way, maybe, or by using something. Yes.
So, Ms. Hanadi, tell us about the main 4 types.
Some of these learning styles include visual learning. These learners prefer reading and want to see what they are learning. Auditory learning. These learners prefer to listen to instruction. Conversation and interaction are effective way of teaching this learning style. Tactile learning. These learners prefer to touch and manipulate objects in order to learn about something. Kinesthetic learning. These learners move around a lot and benefit from getting up from a desk frequently.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Ms. Sana, I want to say something.
Every one of us have different, have a mix of learning styles.
Keep back, Mr. Manhal. Go back to the sim. Yeah, it's okay.
Yes. Again, every one of us have a mix of these different learning styles or techniques, but we have a dominant one. If the teacher know his students' learning styles, he can use the techniques that suits them in the grammar lesson.
So if the teacher knows
Yes.
his students' types, if we summarize, the visual learning students, they need to see
something,
to
maybe
understand.
A video or
so this group, we need to show them, write on the board, use screen to make them use their eyes. Yes. The auditory ones,
they need
to listen.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
They need to by listening.
And sometimes even they say when they study at home, they read aloud so that they receive. So they focus on their ears more than their eyes. The tactile, they need to touch.
Yes.
And this can be done with little kids. We can bring toys, make them hold a doll, a toy of a giraffe, of a dog, of a cat, so that they learn. And the kinesthetic, again, these are young learners. They need to move.
They want to
move.
They
move all the time.
They cannot sit in their desk just for 5 minutes.
Yes.
So
we need to give
negative.
them.
Yes, it's not negative.
Give them purpose.
Play games, move around, so that they. Now we can move, Mr. Manhal, to the following slide, please. This is something important. Refresh your understanding of grammar rules.
Yes.
A lot of people say we know about grammar.
We've already know.
Yeah. Why should we? But this is not correct.
Wrong. We should work on that. We should keep practicing. Keep refreshing our memory.
Pick up a grammar book from time to time.
No matter how long you have been teaching English, you should revise your grammar information. Yes, thankfully we have numerous
resources.
Yes, websites that contain grammar guided for teachers.
Sometimes
that help them to
when you
revise
learn a new sentence, a new example, you think that you have known something and it's with a new vision. So refreshing your information is something very important.
A good teacher needs to revise his information from time to time.
Yes.
Yes.
From textbooks or websites.
I add something. In addition to rechecking grammar, I hope every teacher recheck the pronunciation of all the words they already know, and they will discover.
No matter how good they are.
Yes, even if they think that they pronounce it correctly, it's no problem to recheck from time to time. So that
they will be surprised. And they will be surprised.
Yes, it will be surprising to them that they will see that I've been saying a word in a way for a long time yes. And now I discover that it is said another way.
Yes, exactly.
Next, Mr. Manhal. Miss Sana.
Yes, choosing a teaching approach. Actually, we have many approaches in teaching grammar. The first one is the deductive approach, and the next one is inductive approach. We have
These
the
are
functional.
the main two.
Yes, we have the functional one and the teaching grammar
Yeah.
in context.
Next,
Now,
Mr. Manhal.
let's begin with the first one, which is the deductive approach. Use the deductive approach if you want to explain quickly. Now, the deductive approach of teaching grammar focuses on teaching certain grammar rules and then giving examples of that rule. It can be useful if you want to quickly explain a grammar. It may be more useful with adult students. So, the deductive approach starts with a presentation of the rule, and then it's followed by example in which this rule is applied. This is at first.
So it is no problem to use the deductive approach.
Of course
It
not.
is done
It saves
time.
time.
Save time, yes.
But
With adults.
the problem is when you use the deductive
Arabic.
approach in Arabic.
In Arabic.
It gets straight.
Some teachers use the
Use in
deductive
Arabic.
approach, but in
Yes.
Arabic.
But
So when we say
This is the
grammar
problem.
through context, they think that it's wrong to use the deductive approach. It's not wrong, but in English.
Mhm.
And it saves time.
There are some cases for this approach and other cases for the other approach.
Yes. Can we move next, Mr. Manhal?
Continue.
Yes.
Yes. Now, this approach can minimize students' interaction and involvement.
But it is not acceptable for us to minimize the student interaction and
There should
role.
be action.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that's why we say the inductive is better than the
Okay.
deductive.
Because of the teacher's explanation, it's at the expense of the classroom
Yeah.
time.
So, and the new way of teaching, we say it is student-centered classroom.
Yes.
That's why we say the inductive is better.
Now,
But here, we're here just to clarify. We're not saying that use this way. We're giving you ways to teach grammar, and the teacher, he or she can
the best
choose the best way for
Each situation.
the situation and the
The
students.
student.
Some
The
students
case.
may go with a way, other students may need another way. But we're here just to clarify.
I think most of our teachers are teaching deductive approach.
And in Arabic. Yeah, I know,
Yes, in
I know
Arabic.
this. That's why we're here to say
Because
that
it's easier, you
Especially
know.
with
Easier,
adults.
yes.
They're following
It's
the
easier
easy way.
for
Yes,
them and for
to
the students.
most of
To
our
lecture,
teachers.
to give a lecture, so it's easier.
to continue.
To be fair, we have
Traditional way.
creative
Of course
teachers,
we do.
and we see a lot
A lot
of them.
creative teachers.
But we want all teachers to be
Exactly.
creative and
Okay,
to know
that's-
what they are teaching, to avoid Arabic language while teaching
First of
English. Because in the end, when you explain an Arabic lesson, you don't use English to make it clear to the students. So why to use Arabic for English?
Don't reach to the goal.
But
Yes,
I,
clearly state what
Miss
the rule
Sana,
allows.
yes, Miss Sanadi, you
and
want to say
limit.
something?
Excuse me, you can continue.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Can I? Okay, clearly state what the rule allows and limits. Give a clear and brief explanation about what the grammar rule allows. Also describe what the rule doesn't allow. For example, always use you were and never use you was. Then follow up with an example of the rule. Illustrate the grammar rule with an example. You can use simple sentence to illustrate it once. Then you might choose more complicated sentence to demonstrate how the rule applied. Describe the rules with simplicity, which means boil down the grammatical rules to simple terms. Try not to point out too many exceptions to the rule when you first introduce the rule.
Thank you. So here we go back to what we have said. The teacher needs to use grammar correctly in front of the students before he or she teaches grammar, because the teacher is the source of the language. So it is very important. When we say use you were, never say you was. Of course, no teacher is going to say you was. But what we want to say that always use correct grammar, even with grade 1 and 2 and 3. When I say what is your name, my name is Aula, my name is Majid, we teach them the tense, but we don't talk about the grammar. So the students will acquire. The student will acquire the language. knows how to say it correctly, but we don't talk about grammar until higher levels.
And they should stick to a guide. It's not like I will follow this rule from this book and that rule from that book. Try to have a guide at home so that if you have a problem or you're faced with a certain situation, you can go back to your resource.
So teachers should be creative.
Yes.
Of course they should be.
Next, Mr. Manhal. Miss Hanadi, choosing a teaching approach.
The inductive approach.
No,
The
the second approach.
Yeah, this is the second.
Approach to allow students to explore language. The inductive approach allows students to discover how language and the grammar works. Students learn grammar by making connections with their pre-existing understanding of language. For example, students learning English as a second language will learn to link English grammar rules to their native language grammar rules.
I think here we have grammatical mistake. I deleted the S, but I don't know why it is again here. Language and grammar work.
You didn't save the...
Maybe I didn't save it. It should be language and grammar work. Students think by making connections.
Maybe because this is my file.
No problem. It's okay. Miss Ula, the following one, Mr. Manhal, please.
Now we're again with the inductive approach, in which the students need to discover the grammar themselves by using the language. And here we may allow for better memory retention of a grammar. In this case, students are more autonomous learners. They learn on their own.
This is what we need.
Exactly.
So the new way.
This will last forever. You know, when they learn for themselves, there will be everlasting learning. Now, if we don't have lots of time, we shouldn't use this approach. This way, the students should work out the rule on themselves by using an example, and they can connect this rule to their mother tongue, maybe, to their native language, and they can figure out the rule by at the expense of using the rule in practice. So they can figure out the rule, but before they should practice the language. Now, we should give sentences that demonstrate differences in order to help students pick out the rule. For example, let's say I have read every Stephen King book, and I read Stephen King's latest book last week. Ask the students to identify the difference between these two sentences.
Yes.
So we can give them 10 sentences, and when they tell the difference, they know the rule for themselves.
Yeah.
They work it out
Exactly.
themselves.
They discover
the difference between the deductive. In the deductive, we say when we have time reference, we use the simple past.
Exactly.
When we don't have. Here, we show them two different sentences.
This needs time.
Yes.
So because of that, but it lasts forever.
Yes.
More than one example.
Yeah.
Do you see, Mr. Majid, that this approach plays a heavy demand on teachers because they are going to plan well for their lessons and try to select and organize data to make the students try to manipulate the grammar rule themselves
Actually, this
correctly.
is the role of the teacher to prepare and plan and have ways.
But this approach plays a heavy demand.
But it's for a better generation, you know, better language speaking.
Yeah. The best way, in my opinion, is this one, the inductive one, because it gives the students the opportunity to explore the language, find out, figure out the grammar, and the teacher is a facilitator here, as we always say.
And we are following the natural way, actually.
But you need to be smart enough to guide the students for accurate formulation.
You need to be smart.
Yeah.
As a teacher, you have to be smart. You know, you may face many questions, many situations. So
this is more difficult than the last.
In my opinion, all teachers are smart enough because they chose to be teachers.
Yes.
Or else,
but not all of them use the inductive approach.
Yeah, because they say we don't have time. To use the deductive, we said it's okay, but in English. The problem is we don't want.
Teacher have to mix all approach.
Mix.
Yes.
Mix
If
them
he
up,
mixes all
According to the
approaches,
to the types of
according to
the
students'
students.
level and age and
Students, yes.
competence.
Some
yes.
complicated rules need to be used in deductive
In
approach.
deductive approach, yes.
yes,
They are
yes.
complex, maybe.
If you're teaching high-level secondary stage, for example, and you don't have enough time, you need to use the deductive way. Of course, you're
But
right.
when it's simple, books,
Yes,
it doesn't need
yes.
a lot of time. So
So if we start with lower levels with the inductive, and when we go to higher levels, we can mix, as Ms. Hanadi said, we can use the deductive. This depends on the teacher himself and the time available
exactly.
and the level of the students. Ms. Ula, functional approach.
The function approach, it gives students tool to communicate. Now they need to know how to use the language and use the grammar of the language in everyday uses or situation. So this is the functional approach, which means to focus on teaching grammar so that the student can function in their everyday lives. For example, what will they need to know so that they can go grocery shopping, for example? What language would you use in a restaurant, for example? So this is things that they need. This is functional, to have a function.
Most of our teachers are using in the grade 1, 2, 3 when they enter their class. Good morning, what's your name? What does your favorite sport? I think it's a functional approach.
Yeah, this is functional. They teach them how. Yes, it is correct.
To communicate, to live.
Yeah, teachers usually use this, and this is what you insist on. We are focusing on this, that use grammar correctly so that your students grasp, receive
and
the grammar and use
it.
it. We can say life skills. So we teach life skills through this. We teach them how to communicate with other people in shops, in restaurants, hotels, like this.
Hospitals.
Next, Mr. Manhal. Miss Sana.
Okay. Teach grammar through text, stories, and songs. Use examples of literature and popular writing to illustrate how grammar is used. This can be an effective way to teach grammar. Students can choose their own texts or stories that they'd like to use. This will make the lesson more interesting for the students. Students will also benefit from increased vocabulary that are implied in these texts. The texts can be difficult if they are too advanced for the student's language level.
So here the teacher needs to choose. Maybe he can ask the students to bring their own stories or literature genre.
Yes, that he prefers.
But he chooses the level of the text brought by the students so that it will not be too advanced, so that they cannot. So in this way, we enrich vocabulary and grammar and
subject-verb agreement, for example.
Yes. Next, Mr. Nasur. Here we come to grammar. Not how to teach. Here we have the grammar, and we're going to talk about, we are here to teach difference between singular and Miss Hanadi.
Teach singular and plural nouns. A singular noun is a word that describes one thing. Plural means that there are more than one thing. In most instances, add an s to the end of the singular noun to make it plural. When teaching basic rules, mention that there are exceptions, but you don't need to go into them at this point. Yes, I think we give the rule, so like we can say cats,
Yes.
dogs, without exceptions. Then later we can tell students that children.
Yes, so we don't talk about exceptions from the first time so that we don't distract the student. If the rule is add s,
yes, give
so
general rule.
Exactly.
And then we give exceptions.
And later you can say we have some exceptions, but don't start with the exceptions. Give them the rules so that they practice, and the examples you bring as a teacher should be according to the main way of making plural, adding s. Later, as Ms. Sanadi says, we can talk about man, men, woman, women,
child,
etc.
children, etc.
Next, Mr. Nassour, Miss Ula,
Another basic rule
pronouns.
is to teach pronouns. Of course, we can start by telling them that a pronoun is something to replace a name. For example, Miss Hanadi is something she is. Then we can move again to the complex ones, to the object pronouns or possessive adjectives and things like that. So again, we start with the simple rules and then we can move on to the exceptions or the more complex, let's say.
Well, we can use both approaches here. Either we make the students see that in the story we had a name, Sana, then she, then we ask them to notice between difference, she, what do we mean by she? We mean the first name like this. Then we say, so this is a pronoun, the pronoun can replace. Or we use the deductive. We tell them immediately, we replace the noun and we show them the examples. Next, Mr. Nassour. Whose turn?
Me?
Okay.
Okay. Number 3, teach how to conjugate verbs. Conjugating verbs is an essential skill to understanding how to make sentences match up. This involves making a verb match the subject. For example, when you have the verb jump, it will be conjugated as I jump, you jump, he jumps, and so on. Start with the present tense first and then give the students lots of practice using this tense. Move on to past and future tense once at a time.
So in the past we add ed instead of s. I jumped, it becomes I jumped. In the future I will jump. So we mix between the three tenses, the main three tenses, the present, past, and future, and later we can integrate them with other. Next, Mr. Nassour, please. Miss Salah.
Okay, now with the irregular verbs, just like verb to be. Verb to be is a little bit tricky because it doesn't follow one rule. For example, with I have, I am, you are, he is, and so on. So we can start with teaching the present tense first, and then we can move to the past or something like that. To be, for example, it serves as a foundation for many other types of verb phrases. So it's important to master it before moving on.
Yes, exactly. So the first and most important thing is to teach verb to be to the students
essential.
Because many other tenses depend on the usage of
exactly, and it can be found everywhere, and it's tricky in one way or another. It doesn't follow one rule.
Yes, even when we use the past of am, it's going to be was. So we need to make this clear to the students.
Step by step.
Yes. Next, Mr. Nassour, Miss Hanadi.
Teach how to respond in the negative. If the student wants to disagree with something or say she didn't do something, she will need to know how to construct that sentence. Show the student where to add not in a sentence. For example, you might say, I'm not jumping or I'm not eating.
Exactly. So to make the negative, we use not. And again, two ways. The deductive, you say put not after verb to be or after the auxiliary. And the inductive is to give examples. I'm not eating, I'm not jumping, I'm not listening to you. Yes.
Show them.
Show them the grammar and later tell them that this is the negative. Yes. Next, Mr. Nassour, Ms. Sana.
Yes, after we finished with the basics, we need to go more advanced activities. Now, how to teach diagram a sentence.
Diagram a sentence.
Yes, diagramming a sentence is useful.
We mean by diagramming saying the subject, the verb, the object, and so on.
The order.
Yeah. Yes. Diagramming a sentence is a useful exercise to help students understand how sentences are constructed. So it's a regular method, or the teacher's regular method for illustrating parts of the sentence, okay? As you say, verb, noun, and so on. Now, find the subject and predicate verb of the sentence. Find direct objects and indirect objects. Then discuss which words alert the meaning of the other words. Finally, identify dependent and independent clauses.
Yeah, so we move from the simple to the complicated.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Some words alter other words. We have dependent clauses, we have independent clauses. Now here we're moving to higher levels, advanced level. Next, Mr. Nassour.
Again, in the same way,
Miss
we
Ala.
can start teaching complex verb tenses. So we start with the simple tenses, simple present, simple future, things like that. Then we can move to the more complex one, for
Present
example,
perfect.
present perfect simple, past progressive, and conditional sentences, and things like that. So we start with the simple, and then when they master the skills, they can move to the more.
It's a matter of scaffolding.
Exactly. Scaffolding is something very
Building
essential.
on previous experience. Again, we need to know the level of our students.
Of course.
Some teachers may say, I received weak and strong students. So the teacher needs to fill the gaps.
And work on that.
Yeah, of the weak students. They can use group work, putting strong ones with weak ones. They can help each other. Not to say it was not my job, my own duty to give them what they should have taken in the past. No, we need to fill the gaps because sometimes some teachers are better than others. In the end, this student is the most important thing.
Yeah.
All the teaching process goes around this student.
Starts and ends with the student.
Yes, so we need to put this in our minds and to work on this. Next, Mr. Nassour. Proper terminology. Ms. Sana.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, your turn.
No, okay, your
Okay.
turn. You can start, Mr. Hadi.
Teach proper terminology. When you are teaching beginning grammar, it might be better to use simple terms to describe concepts. As you teach more advanced grammar, you may choose to start introducing the proper terms that describe grammatical concepts.
Yes. So here we move to higher level, to teach concepts from the simple to the complicated, to idioms, terminology. Yes.
Simple grammar, and then move to
Complicated one. Next, Mr. Nassour. Now, Ms. Sana, your turn.
Okay, thank you. Number 4, give quizzes that test students' understanding. Now, periodically assess your students' learning with quizzes.
Periodically assess. We always need to assess the students to check their progress.
Ongoing assessment.
Because the tests in general measure the knowledge of your students. Now, this will give them a chance to put their knowledge to the test. This also gives you a chance to see how well they are learning the concepts. You will also see if concepts are confusing to students.
Can we move on, Mr. Nassour? 2 slides, I think. Yeah. After this, again, effective grammar teaching, and again next.
So the quizzes
Yes.
should be should have a large variety of questions. For example, multiple choices, true, false, and short answer questions.
You're absolutely right. Without evaluation and measurement, we don't know. The evaluation, even it is for the teacher himself or herself, to see if she or he was able to teach these students. So we need evaluation and measurement. We have periodical ones. We call them ongoing evaluation, and final evaluation at the end of every lesson and at the end of a semester, the end of year, academic year exam. We come now to examples to teach grammar. We need to give as much as possible of sentences so that we clarify the grammar. Ms. Ola?
So we have started with knowing your students, knowing the learners. After that, you have to know the different learning styles. Then you have to decide on the best one to choose. You have to have your guide, and now how to teach effectively. First of all, and most important, we need to put in mind that we need examples to teach grammar. We cannot teach without examples.
Yes.
As much examples as we can, so we can things can be clear and it makes sense to the students. So it's helpful to see how grammar rules are put into practice. so they can understand, and no one can understand without examples. So the first one and most important to teach effectively is to use examples.
Yes, so the teacher needs to prepare a lot of examples so that these students know how to use grammar according, not just to say the diagram, but we need examples are more important. Next, Mr. Nassour, please. Ms. Hanadi, your turn.
Build upon concepts that are familiar to the student. Explain
Exactly.
grammatical rules by using concepts that the student already knows. For example, students will likely to familiar with verb tenses such as past, present, and future. So we give examples to the students which depend on the previous knowledge for the learners.
Mm-hmm.
Use this as ways to explain more complicated verb tenses.
Exactly. We need to build on what the students have, and what they have helps us to give them more, to have more information about grammar. Next, Mr. Nassour, Ms. Sana.
Yes. Give students plenty of time to practice.
Practicing is very important.
Yes,
of course.
so that they can be more confident. Reinforce your lesson by giving the students lots of time to put their grammar knowledge to use. The point of learning grammar is to improve communication skills. Give your students the opportunity to practice frequently.
So practicing is essential. Without practicing, it's nonsense. The students need to practice the grammar so that they be able to use the language correctly and accurately.
To see how it works.
Of course.
In practical side.
Make instruction appropriate for your students.
To teach effectively, we need to make the instruction appropriate for your students. So you need to prepare kind of a file, a note, to know your students, their level, their achievements.
It's a good idea to have a note about your students.
Exactly. To know their learning level, their interest, their style. This way, time can be invested better, and your knowledge can be invested better, and this will save time and reduce your frustration and confusion for both the students and the teachers.
Exactly.
So organization is again very important part, and write a file, and this is something new, and we ask our teachers to have a file about the students and their levels of teaching, of learning,
yes,
so that they can know how to deal with them, what to change, so that they can benefit more from the teaching.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Nassour. Miss Sana. Plan games.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm tired.
Yeah, it's okay. Recover.
Okay, plan games and interesting activities. Grammar can be a dry subject if the teacher doesn't engage the students effectively. Play games, plan conversation scenarios, and do other activities that are appropriate and fun for the students.
This can go with kinesthetic learners.
Yes.
They need to move, so
move the action.
Yes, playing games is something nice, and this can be done with lower levels or young learners.
Even adults like to play and do
Of
activities.
course.
They have no time.
Mm-hmm.
No, I mean while learning.
While learning, yes. Next, Mr. Nassour. Miss Hanadi, will you please correct students in a positive way? This is something very important. When we correct the student, we need to know how to correct, not to confuse the student, not to say no or wrong or something like this.
Yes.
We're going to see what
correct
the teacher
students
needs
in
to do.
A positive way. Don't discourage your students by correcting their grammar in a way that reduces their desire to speak. Instead, correct errors by continuing the conversation and asking questions using the correct grammar. For example, your student says, I catch the ball. Don't respond with, you mean, you caught the ball. Instead, say, you caught the ball. Did you score a point? Continue the conversation with a gentle correction and, and an added question or comment.
Yes. So we don't say no, and we don't say the correction is like this. The teacher has two things to do. First, to repeat the sentence correctly without talking about the mistake,
And add
and to
information
add something more like a question.
so that the concentration is not only on the mistake. So it's
Yes,
okay
they
to
should
make
correct
mistakes.
in a gentle way.
Teacher should correct the
Yes.
student's mistake, without destroying their confidence.
Yeah, of
They
course.
should praise them. They shouldn't
Encourage-
embarrass them in
encourage
front of
them.
the class or hurt their feeling.
Yes.
The correction should be
If the
educational.
student is interrupted or told that he made a mistake, he will be afraid of
Yes.
saying anything in the future. So forget about the mistake, you say it, and it's very important for the teacher to say it correctly, not to move because he doesn't want to embarrass
Mm.
the student who made a mistake. No,
Yes.
correct,
But don't embarrass.
but don't
embarrass,
talk
don't-
about it. Just say the correction and move.
on.
The students will see what you said and they will depend on you, and they will notice that you said it in a different way, so what you said,
But it's okay. It's okay to make mistake, but
yeah, of course.
pay attention next time.
If they don't make mistakes, they will not
They will
learn.
not learn.
Yes. Good.
We come to two types. The floor is yours, Miss Saula.
Now,
Next, again,
now,
Mr. Nassour.
grammar, when we talk about deductive, we mean that grammar is taught in isolation. It means it's taught by rules. We have to talk about the details, the things that constitute, let's say, the language or the sentences. And what we talk about, which is inductive approach, the grammar in context.
I want to say something,
Please.
if I may, before we
Of
move
course.
on. What I always say, grammar does not teach the language. Grammar comes to adjust what you know about language.
To give it a framework, let's say.
We have a common mistake by a lot of teachers. When someone says, I want to learn English, will you please teach me? Immediately says, okay, sit down, have a notebook, and write the simple present tense. They
Yes,
start with
yes.
simple.
Yes.
This is wrong. When someone says, teach me the language, give them as much as possible of examples.
Yes, it's very important.
Start with them. If he has nothing in English, say, what's your name? My name is. Make them just repeat the language without knowing about the grammar, but say it correctly and make the learner say them correctly. Later, when you come to the grammar level, you give him or her the rule just to adjust. Because when I always say, if you're going to speak grammar, you will make mistakes. Learn the language away from grammar to be fluent, say it, and later you learn grammar just to adjust your language. So grammar does not teach, grammar comes just to diagram a sentence.
It's the system of the language.
Yes, but the language
Exactly.
comes first, and this is what we
Yes.
hope
I
our
have an
teachers do.
example. I'm not sure if it's correct to give such an example, but I'm going to say it. For example, I can read about how to play an oud for like years, but I will never be able to play the oud until I hold one and start playing.
Yeah, and sometimes without knowing anything
You can
about
play,
solfege,
exactly, you can play.
you can play.
Mhm.
But if you learn the do re mi solfege
years.
or for years, you will not be able
No,
to
never.
practice.
So
We're not saying that it is not important to study
it
solfege,
is important, of course
but
it is.
first learn and then adjust it by it. Learn the language and then adjust it with the grammar. Next, Mr. Nassour, difference between
So kind of difference between inductive and deductive approaches.
Mhm.
With inductive, we have fluency because we're going to start using the language. So we have a fluency. You can understand the same way, again, the same way we learn about the native language. We understand that small children, the way they are talking, even if they are only using words. So
Mhm.
we can understand. So fluency, but accuracy with deductive. It doesn't mean that accuracy is not important. It is as important, but fluency leads to accuracy.
when you are fluent, you may make mistakes.
You may make mistakes.
But grammatical learners
May never be able to speak.
not the mistakes you make, but they can't
They
speak.
cannot speak. And they
Yes.
cannot
And this
express
is
themselves.
the problem of a lot of people. They know how to correct you if you made a mistake, but they cannot speak fluently. We want to work on fluency first. Then we move
And
to
we need accuracy, but to start with fluency. And because of that, we can be creative. When we are fluent, we can be creative, we can use the language, different types of sentences. But when we follow the rules, we may stick to the rules, and this will make us constrained to the rules, restricted to the rules, and we may be afraid to make mistakes if we're not following the rules. Acceptable, again, we understand. That's what I'm saying, that you may say water, and I understand that you need a glass of water. You don't have to say the whole sentence. So it's acceptable.
Would you please give me a glass of water?
but with the deductive approach, it needs to be correct because it's following the rules again. Implicit, the grammar, we are talking about the grammar. With the inductive approach, the grammar is implicit. You say the grammar correctly and you use the grammar, but not showing that.
Inside the context.
Inside the context, it's not clear. With the deductive approach, it's explicit, it's clear. You can say that this is the subject, this is the verb, and things like that. So to finish everything up, we say that inductive approach is top to down. It means we start
the big picture
to the detail, to the small pieces. With the deductive approach, we start with the pieces, with the detail, with the rules, and from that we can move on to the big picture. But sometimes I'm afraid that some people cannot get to the big picture. They stick with the rules and they start and end with the rules. So that's why we advise, if it's possible, to follow the inductive or mix them up.
Mr. Nassour, next.
It's everything.
I think we are wrapping up. This is the last slide we have. Let's summarize before we wrap up. We started about the teacher needs to know the level of the students, then the types of the students. We mentioned
different types,
teaching style,
visual,
tactile,
auditory,
and kinesthetic. And the teacher needs to mix between the approaches. We talked about the deductive approach. We said it can save time, but it is not as good as the inductive one.
Because it won't last forever.
Now, if the teacher wants to use the deductive, he needs to give examples. As much as possible of examples. And assessment, we always need to have, we have something new called grading ladder, and we have the checklist. So that always knows the level of the student so that he fills the gaps. And we talked about difference between inductive and deductive.
Functional approach.
The functional,
we have some basic rules, simple rules, and then we move to the advanced activities.
This is what we call scaffolding, building on the previous experiences of the students. We don't give something new. We need to give them something new and to add something to it so that they improve. Finally, I want to thank my colleagues in the studio, Ms. Ola Al-Moui, English Language Supervisor, Parpus, Directorate, Ms. Hanadi,
thank you very much.
The sick supervisor with us.
I'm
sorry for you, recover soon.
I'm so much tired.
And Ms. Sana Ismail, English Language Teacher, Damascus Countryside Directorate, and me, Abdul Majid Oghorli, Coordinator of English Language in the National Center for Curricular Development. Hope you have enjoyed what we have given and hope you have got some benefit. And we are looking forward to see you in following webinars. Till that time, please stay safe and sound. Goodbye.